I am Al Dampier, managing partner of Dampier Consulting Group. I started with a doctorate in pharmaceutical sciences in the pharmaceutical industry. Since 1998, I've been a serial entrepreneur with a genomics company, a tech company here in Austin. And currently, I'm either raising funds for two oncology biotech companies or working with a number of companies on finding C-level talent so they can build their organizations, along with volunteering around substance abuse disorders, which is something I've always been passionate about. And who would like to go next? Mary, you're online with me, so why don't you go first from the Bay Area?
Yeah, hi everybody. I'm sorry I can't be there in person. I love New York City. So, as Al said, I'm here in the Bay Area. I run a small VC fund that invests in therapeutic startups. We put seed stage money in. Before that, I had several decades of experience in biopharma operating companies. Leave it at that.
Thanks, Mary. And ladies in the room?
Hi, everybody. I'm Marissa Fayer. I'm the founder and CEO of HERhealthEQ, which is a global nonprofit social enterprise focused on women's health in developing countries. I'm also a venture partner at Assiduity Capital, and we focus on investments in sub-Saharan Africa. And I run a consulting firm advising healthcare companies on where to go, what to do, what's next. So pretty applicable for this discussion.
Thank you.
I'm Daniella Kranjac. I'm a founding partner at Dynamk Capital. We are a venture growth equity fund focused entirely on life science industrials. What that means, it is the picks and shovels, the fundamental technologies that biopharma relies on, whether it's discovery, development, or manufacturing. So this covers the gamut from tools, technologies, AI, platform technologies, as well as consumables and capital. We're a team of operators. My background is chemical engineering. It's pretty far removed at this point. But I started out my career as a entrepreneur in the space, sold that business to GE in 2007, and then subsequently led their M&A and their business development for the space. So saw a gap in the funding landscape and took the idea and set up Dynamk with it. Excited to be here today.
Thank you. So I'm going to start with a different question than perhaps what I was thinking. It seems post-COVID, more people are concerned about relationships, society, their workplace, and I've seen a number of nonprofits start. And I know, Marissa, you have a nonprofit. Why don't you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, thankfully we were in existence before COVID, and so for us, unfortunately, a lot of our work had to stop because of what we were doing. Not anybody cared about non-communicable diseases in developing countries. Unfortunately, if they did, we wouldn't be in such a problem probably, or wouldn't have as many hospitalizations or deaths. But we focus on women's health in developing and emerging markets. It is oftentimes a revenue-based opportunity for some of these doctors, and also for us, which is always pleasant as well. But we're ensuring and working with medical device manufacturers and hospital systems and getting a lot of their excess equipment that they threw in the closet because they just didn't know what to do with, and we get them to where they're actually needed and used. So, but in this landscape, the mental health aspect of it is really important. I also think that nonprofits have a huge place to change. The traditional nonprofit of doing everything for free is no longer completely applicable any longer. And I also think that it's the nonprofits that can get into these other countries with a little bit more ease to help on these health conditions that can help provide support when these large organizations or even startups don't have the opportunity to do that, and oftentimes it's partnerships. And so I think that's where a lot of our work in the future, and has been the last 2 years especially, but in the future it's really going to be moving everybody forward.
Thanks, Marissa. It's funny you said we're not working for free anymore. So much volunteer work does go for free, doesn't it? But it's always worthy causes. So post-COVID, ladies, what do you see as it relates to emerging trends in healthcare? Daniella?
I I can take a stab at this. Certainly, a lot of what we're seeing in our space, and being that we support all of the biopharma in terms of their innovation and their new products going forward. In fact, I should probably disclose, Pfizer Ventures is one of our LPs. We also work with Lonza and several others in the space. So that gives us a lot of insights as to what they're looking at in terms of next generation technologies, in terms of delivery. A lot of what we're seeing, and certainly in the tail of COVID here, as we hope we are, or at least nearing that tail, we certainly see that vaccines are more front and center than they have traditionally been for the last 20, 30 years. But that's not to say, I mean, regardless of the vaccines and COVID and those sorts of issues, we still have so many unresolved points of care, right? Cancer, heart disease, we've got diabetes, which is still unmanaged and growing globally. We have a growing middle class globally, and that is certainly informing more healthcare spend. And so as we look to those trends, we're seeing a lot more in terms of personalized medicine. However, that being said, the tools today don't allow for personalized medicine to be effectively delivered, and certainly not at a reasonable cost. So what we're looking at in our field is particularly purpose-built solutions, purpose-built technologies that help enable the reduction of the cost to improve access really globally to those therapies. Right now, it's kind of a luxury. It's a Western luxury, and it's something that, you know, inherently there is a social impact component to our business, but that's really front and center. I think our mRNA technologies for sure, and then cell and gene therapies is another key area. Again, projected growth is 35% CAGR. We're really excited about where that segment of the industry goes.
With more and more personalized medicine, do you see people taking a more active role in their healthcare?
Oh, absolutely. I can speak to that, but also maybe Mary probably has. I know Mary from other circles, so I'm sure she's got some pieces to add here. But certainly, people are more engaging with their health. I think COVID has sort of underscored that. You know, how can you maybe improve your outcomes by just making a couple of changes in your life, right? So there's that sort of health basis wellness component to it. But I think as you get onward, you're going to start to see a lot more engagement around health and healthcare.
Yeah, and we've seen a lot with our company, Rx Genomics, with people being more interested in antibody testing and COVID testing and what have you. So it's very interesting to see the personalized medicine grow. Mary, your comments. What do you have to add?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, I'm in old school biopharma therapeutics, and that was doing really well before COVID. And it has exploded because everybody realizes the importance of investing in and supporting innovation in therapeutics development and vaccine development. So that's what I've always invested in. That's what I've always done. In that sense, it's just investing in startups that develop innovative medicines, right? So I think the trend that I've seen, to add to what everybody else has said, which I completely agree with, those things are also really exciting trends, is of course the added investment in infectious disease, right? So honestly, before COVID, that was one of the least attractive segments because it was so hard to get products. It was so hard to move things forward from a variety of reasons. And now there's a lot more support, investment, ability to move products through testing and into patients in a way that's helping people, obviously, right? And so I think that is just really increasing. We have, you know, basically a third of our portfolio is in infectious disease, so we had invested in those beforehand. So certainly they're doing really well with the added support and capital interest.
Thanks, Mary. And for you, Mary, with since you mentioned funding pre-COVID, post-COVID, do you think funds are more available for biotech startups or less available, and why?
You know, it's interesting in my space, and I'm curious what the other panelists are seeing. It hasn't, the sort of breakout hasn't changed, which is this. There was always a lot of money for kind of the haves, the very big, you know, startups in biopharma are often still a very large affair, like the minimum, you know, first funding was between 30 and 50 million, like just always quite big. And now they're even bigger. You see lots and lots of first funding rounds that are 100 million and above. And I said this on another panel at some point, but we don't really use the term unicorn to describe companies that, you know, go public or have $1 billion plus valuation because it's so common, right? So that trend has continued, and part of that is, you know, what it takes to bring a product to market. But where I am, putting that seed money in and the smaller rounds has continued to be kind of underfunded, right? So I'm kind of one of the few players in this space. It's a little bit of a head scratcher why people aren't coming a little earlier, because I think, you know, you see mRNA, that was worked on for 3 decades and more before they figured it out. You've got to start and work on something for a while to really get to those breakthroughs.
Yeah, absolutely. I know one that we're consulting with right now. We've been on it for 10 years, and we're just now we just got IND approval. Marissa, Daniella, additional comments there?
Yeah, so I was thinking, and I agree with everything that the lady said. The other big thing that I think in 2022 is going to really start accelerating even further is globalization. And so the globalization of healthcare. And we've all been talking about it, and sure, there's investments in other areas, but the fact that there's specific investment funds set up for investment in Africa. I just read like 3 minutes before we started, Organon just signed an agreement to start a new venture lab for North Africa and the Middle East. I mean, these are regions that are really not invested in as far as global healthcare. And so I think there's going to be a lot more investment in just general global healthcare. Obviously at Aciduity, we're focused on Sub-Saharan Africa, and so we're always looking for new investments, and it has to be also right-sized. So exactly what Mary was saying, like $100 million investment is absolutely not applicable for maybe 3 companies in all of Sub-Saharan Africa. And they're probably not in the healthcare space, quite honestly. And so I think there's gonna be a lot more investment in that. There's a lot more focus on it, and you know, we can bring up Omicron, but you know, now everybody's really focused on all of a sudden Africa, and they should have had better healthcare to contain this. Well, nobody's been investing in them. There's no generalized healthcare, and there's a lower standard of care for healthcare in other countries and in other regions, and until everybody globally starts investing in it, and there's technologies that are built that are very specific for healthcare in other countries in lower resource settings, then we can all maybe be on an even playing field and have that discussion. But I think that's very much, you know, while 2021 was a lot about digital health, I think that's absolutely going to continue. I think 2022 is really going to bring in a lot more of the globalization of healthcare, and that, I mean, that's just my hope, really. We'll see.
So what types of funds or companies do you see emerging in Africa?
Well, I mean, I'll put the plug in Aciduity Capital. We're about to raise a fund for healthcare in Africa. There are only a few, quite honestly, there's about 5 that are very specific for Africa. There are other people that are making investments into healthcare in Africa. There are very few funds dedicated specifically to healthcare in Africa. Beyond Capital is wonderful. They've recently expanded to other regions, so they're no longer very specific. You know, as I said before, there's also a lot of joint ventures happening, and I think that's where the exciting investment can also happen. And this is where these big companies who have made a ton of money, especially in light of COVID, that can invest into other regions and improve, you know, potential market share for them, but also improve healthcare for everybody else around the world.
Well, I think that's probably a more interesting, sustainable approach, at least the approach that Kate's is taking together with WHO, together with some of the leading biopharmas to, sort of upright those initiatives. Maybe Al, building on one of your comments earlier, the question that Mary was developing, around what we've seen as a result of COVID and what's going forward. I think certainly biotech and traditionally therapeutics have received the lion's share, they garner the lion's share of the attention in the space. Somewhat rightly so, right? But those are kind of more on the binary outcome approach, right? It's a 0 or 1. You either get that regulatory approval or you don't. And in most cases, you don't. And so that leads to a kind of a different style of investing, really suited for venture. There's been no shortage of capital in that space whatsoever. I think maybe Mary's focus is a little different, and so there's an underserved segment there, as is with our focus on life science industrials, it's been an underserved segment. However, what COVID has sort of shown us is that those industrials, those sort of underpinnings of the industry were kind of the under the radar heroes of delivering kits for diagnostics, different delivery mechanisms for those therapies. And so, we're really excited to see what has happened in terms of funding is that there is a bit of a renaissance in this space. And so we're seeing a lot more of the leading players start to pay attention to life science industrials, which is great for us because then we actually build up the ecosystem beyond just us in that segment. But we're super excited about what's to come. And if you look at the 2020 versus 2021 investment in life science industrials alone, by mid-year, we had already surpassed what has traditionally been invested in a full year. So really exciting space to invest in.
What role, I know, Mary, it looked like you were about to say something.
I wanted to throw out an anecdote as an example kind of what other panels were talking about. We have at least one therapeutics company where we had one of the co-investors around the syndicate effectively was a spin out from the Gates Foundation, which Daniella was just referencing, and they've really come up with this great model where when they invest these funds, they have these clauses that really require the company to not only develop a therapeutic in the developed world where that's where they can make the most money, right? But also when applicable, they make a promise, and it's very specific and well thought out, to hand off or support, usually both, the development of the same therapeutic in developing nations. And so we have at least one company that, immediately gave away the rights in developing areas, including Africa, to their anti-infective agent, which is an oral pill that is for severe infections. And there's a long list of them, some of which you only see in certain geographic regions, not usually developed countries. So that's, I think, a really great model, and I hope more will have the opportunity to do that more often. As you know, some disorders and diseases are really only coming up in well-fed countries, right? So there's also sort of different needs geographically, but I think it's a fascinating space, and there are concrete groups that have been around working on this for a while. And I certainly would echo pointing to the Gates Foundation and others and using their clauses in their investments.
So Mary, there have been a lot of changes with COVID in vaccine therapy and vaccine research and the way things have been done to get the RNA and the DNA research done in record time. What technology do you see continuing to change in clinical trials and particularly in vaccines?
I mean, I'm not sure if this is directly getting at what you're saying. I would say, the mRNA vaccines, as I said, they've been around. The mRNA technology has been in development and testing for decades. So what was sped up, if anything, was simply people staying up late every night, getting through the bureaucratic paperwork piece of it, whereas, normally they have a life and they go home at 5 o'clock. So I'm not really sure, The FDA has a variety of initiatives that they always examine about ways that they can prioritize certain disease areas that maybe were neglected, the orphan disease initiatives that have been around now for quite a while, or one example where there are some capability to, when you have a really small set of patients, often kids very, very sick, try to incentivize. That's not a huge market, from a business standpoint, try to help get products into the hands of the patients, in a more, it's kind of impossible to show that something works if you can't have access to the patient. So there's all kinds of kind of somewhat boring, frankly, but really impactful regulatory innovations. That's not really technology. I mean, biopharma is always testing new technologies. And I think Daniella gave a great summary of, there's a lot of gene therapy, of course. We really didn't, a lot of us weren't sure about mRNA, and now there's proof. So that can go in so many different directions itself. And there's lots of other things always being developed, different approaches beyond the single pill.
Yeah, it's interesting that more and more companies are focusing on the orphan drugs, as you mentioned, Mary, and sometimes the money's not there, but their technology is useful in other areas. And I'm seeing that with a couple of oncology companies right now, where they can use their technology and their AI platform, artificial intelligence platform, and other technology, their research technology, to expand into other markets, including infectious diseases and some other places. But so, Danielle, you had a really interesting comment. You said it a little bit sort of offhand earlier today, and certainly when we talked on the phone. Picks and shovels. What picks and shovels are you taking to Africa?
Yeah, the picks and shovels.
Why don't you elaborate on that a little bit? I love the terminology.
It just makes it far easier. We haven't come up with a better explanation, so we're sticking with picks and shovels. But
I like it.
I was gonna say Mary's comments and your comments prompted me on something else. I mean, I think back to the vaccine technology. So for an example, we're looking at technologies that improve stability and reduce the need for cold chain, for example, in delivery of vaccine products. So that not only has utility in vaccine products, but it actually has utility in the broader biologics space as well, because if you can bring something, let's say from an IV delivery where the patient has to sit for hours on end, and you move that to a subcutaneous injection delivery where it's a quality of life issue. I know many of us have family members who have gone through those things. It's not pleasant, it's not fun. If you can reduce that, that's a quality of life improvement. So we look at things like that. But to build on your point, Al, of the AI and the machine learning and how that applies for clinical trials, we have an investment. Envisagenics is based here in New York. They're an AI machine learning platform for RNA therapeutics. I know it seems crazy. We did invest in them about 3 years ago. They've just recently had their Series A follow-on, so we're really excited about that step up in valuation. But what they're doing is actually identifying patient populations for biopharma partners like Biogen, who they currently work with, and identifying the most optimal patient subsets to really get those delivery of therapeutics, whether it's biomarkers or from their RNA-seq data. And so that's I think a key differentiator when you look at clinical trials and how things are going forward. But yeah, those are the sorts of things that we invest in, whether it's platforms, whether it's anything that biopharma relies on really fundamentally to do their work. And that spans, again, discovery, development, manufacturing. That's largely because we all came from the industry. All the partners in Dynamk have come from the industry. We've all been entrepreneurs. We've all grown businesses, sold businesses, or acquired businesses in the space. So it gives us a unique perspective.
And so, you're saying you're picks and shovels. I don't know, I have to come up with a better analogy, but I was just thinking about like what we do at Acidity. I don't know, maybe it's like the masking tape or something, but like we're investing in like small containers that can cold chain and make sure that the vaccines can be delivered. And it's not like on the back of a moped. Like this is like you need to get them places. And if we're talking about vaccine development and also vaccine delivery, I mean, we have to, again, when we're talking about the rest of the world, we need to think about they all don't have a CVS on every single corner where and you can just walk in, like, they need to go out to individual villages, but these vaccines have to be refrigerated, and so, I don't know, come up with a better analogy, I think it's better than masking tape, but like, there's something there. I'll give you, maybe some rights or royalties to the analogy, but I think we need to think on the picks and shovels, but we also have to think about everybody else, and I think a lot of the work that you're doing will help probably, advance the rest of the world, and exactly what you're saying, if we can come up with this in a longer term that is subcutaneous, well then great, and that's easier to deliver and at least to transport and have delivered in other locations.
So early in my career, I was in infectious disease research, and one of my colleagues actually wrote the vaccine protocols for the flu vaccine, since we're talking about vaccine. And what's interesting is that there were so many deaths with the flu. I never understood why flu vaccines weren't mandated, and more deaths than many other things that we could get into politically. We won't go down that rabbit hole. But there are lots of people who don't want to take the vaccine now, and and vaccines mutate, and people are acting like that's something new. Well, they've been mutating all along. I mean, we had H1N1 and many others, and then the companies continue to modify the vaccine to fit the new viruses that are coming out, and you've got this big thing going on. This is, I guess, an opinion, because I really don't have an answer, but Marty asked me the question. I think it's a good question. Why do you think so few people are not getting their vaccines?
Are people fatigued, do you think, or it is exhausting, right?
You also have to understand that we're in New York, so there's a little bit of a bias, I think, here in New York versus.
What's the bias in New York? I'm not aware of it.
Not quite so crazy. Oh, sorry. We're not talking
No,
about
Yeah, and that's always like, it's.
And you think just because y'all talk about you hear so in Texas.
I think it's unfortunate. It's.
We're running out of words. Answer the question.
No, I agree with it, but I think it's a failure of our educational system that people don't understand how vaccines work, how basic science works. And so, that I think is the root of a lot of problems.
It's one of the many failures.
And all of us in the scientific community understand the science behind it, and or most of us, and
I mean, healthy death.
Is it really education or culture? Because Europe does definitely have the education, but they're behind us.
It's even less people are taking the vaccine.
Absolutely, I don't
And
think.
even fewer are taking the booster, right?
No, it's really a social belief and religious belief, and
Marty, I have a question from Marissa.
There's a big resistance in France in particular, right?
whenever you get into agricultural environment, they're used to, dealing with the nature as is,
Hey, we have another question from the audience.
Yeah, we have somebody who's here in the panel room that would like to comment. So Sammy, would you like to make a comment?
Yeah, hey, good afternoon, everyone. So just giving a European bit of context to the vaccine and taking it or not taking it. Sorry. So look, in Europe, there's been just as much issues, and I don't think it's about education to a degree. It's also what is the messaging from the government? So the Swiss government and the French government initially were very clear they were against the vaccine regardless. And then they turn around and go, oh, we're going to put mandates, you must take it. So it's not a US issue per se. I think the US has additionally, some history that goes against it. So Tuskegee in particular, which has been a kind of an issue. But from the European perspective, the governments have had just as many issues, and most of it is self-inflicted.
All right, so I'm going to drag us out of that COVID rabbit hole. I guess we could talk about that all day. There's a lot more questions than answers, but hats off to the people doing the research, because there's some good alternatives, and the boosters are working. I see
I have one more question from the audience.
Okay, go ahead.
Neil?
My question is from Marissa. Marissa, I know you focus on women health. And I heard from you about Sub-Saharan Africa, about the Middle East, North Africa. Any focus on your backyard, on Central and South America? And the second part of my question is, we hear about so many stimulus programs and trillions of dollars that are proposed, are printed, to be printed. Do you get a share of that
I mean,
as a cause?
well, if anybody knows how to get that money, please call me.
Lobbyists, you need lobbyists.
Mike Milken does it all the time.
Great, to talk to anybody about that. I mean, the intent is, as the nonprofit, yes, we for sure would try to get some of it, when they begin to open that up, and also start considering the rest of the world. There's only one organization within the US government right now, typically that's doing it, USAID. As they continue to get more money, for developing countries, we will work on that for sure. As far as women's health go, and also Latin America, absolutely, it is a focus. It's a focus for us as an organization, as HERhealthEQ, and the really big causes down there are diabetes, heart disease, maternal health, that are continuing to kill more women or incapacitate them more than COVID is, more than anything else, more than any other unfortunate men's conditions. And it's the women who are providing for their families, who are sending their children to school, and that's one of the reasons why we decided to focus on women, because we as a secondary want the children, especially the girls, to go to school, because what we're doing is wonderful to save the women, but it's going to be the children who are going to save the rest of us. They're the ones going to change our lives. They're the ones that are going to come up with the cures for cancer if we don't already have it. They're going to come up with the ways to democratize clean energy and all of these things. And every person, especially every child, girl, deserves to go to school. And so we want to make sure that the women are healthy to send their girls to school. And so in Latin America, it's really important because it is a cultural shift that hasn't fully happened yet. And so when the women are healthy, let's
Hey, Al, Fred
Yes.
Al joined in and he has a comment. Fred, do you want to comment on some of this?
Yeah, I'd be happy to. Thank you very much. This is a great conversation. Healthcare is so much in need of so much talent, which was some of it in here, and it's so many things wrong with it. All of this is very helpful, and I'm very happy that you're talking about it, particularly going overseas and making it one big world of healthcare problem and trying to solve it. But I thought a couple of comments. First, I think the teachings and the learning from COVID is far bigger than really how we deliver vaccines, which is great. I think it's great that we have mRNA, as we talked about as a biochemist. I was working on it 25 years ago. And that is fantastic. The sequencing that we're able to do in a week to sequence the bug is just incredible. So kudos to our companies and to the people of the community. So that's fantastic. One of the learning is that one of the fundamental technologies is put to use and not get shackled with the government, with the FDA, and see all these agencies just put everything down. Despite that, we got through it, and because the bit of speed was put into the picture. So I think that's one of the major learning. This whole genomics area is phenomenal, and I think it's 20 to 40% of every disease is mediated somehow with genetics. So you'll see more of this thing. So I hope this is an area where we're going to reflect more. Say, look at what it did for us with this vaccine. We're going to do more of this. The second area that has to do with population, I think it's a very important one to note that people who really died, or people who really were taken apart family-wise with this COVID, people who have very low means, they're underprivileged, and also the very elderly. So the population studying this and trying to do something about it preventively is far more important than reactively. This is a big problem about the whole healthcare system. Everything that you and I and everybody talks about healthcare system, it's about phenotypic information. Too late of an information. It's reactive medicine. It's not proactive medicine. It's not preventive medicine. We're not preventing this vulnerable population to get into it. So if we want to really do a service, and there's plenty of opportunity, those are the areas. So those big areas, the big science that we have to help us, the population priorities and what we can do to help them, and the preventive care that is there. Everybody who really got killed with this COVID and we know journey and diseases, they've got a very poor immune system. What do we do to boost it and keep it down? I keep my comments to those two. There's more learning. Those are the two big ones that I say.
So Fred is basically saying that there's too much focus on treatment of disease rather than wellness or treatment of keeping disease from happening, right? So I think that's one of the issues he's talking about. So that's really important. And the other comment that Fred made was that COVID has been an education in itself about how Americans respond to disease, rather than what everybody in the pharmaceutical or healthcare industry says they should respond. So I think that's relevant. Fred?
Yeah.
Al, do you want to keep on going?
Yeah, well, that I just had a whole bunch of thoughts based on that last statement as far as education and patient awareness. And I think Marissa or Daniella mentioned diabetes and what needs to be done there. And, is going way back, we talk about diet and exercise, and people still don't use diet and exercise. We use diet and Twinkies. But Mary caught that. Thank you, Mary. So ladies, we've talked about a lot of things. What would you like to add at this point? Let me just open the floor a little bit, because I know that you've got other segments within your work that you'd like to share. So I'm just going to open the floor to you for just a few minutes.
I'll just interject. I'm not sure if this is really in a breakthrough comments or wrap up comment, but in addition to diabetes, there's a new disease called NASH that, Fred's comment, I completely agree with. We are only reactive. We wait until somebody is sick, and then we spend a lot of time and money fixing them. And that's, worldwide. But, and I've involved in various efforts over the years to try, and it's sort of the way the system is set up, the way that healthcare is tracked and paid for. And so I'm sure some of Daniella's investments, on the diagnostics front to really track these things. But NASH is something like diabetes, where type 2 diabetes, where it happens over time as you overeat and you start to damage your organs. And it's just so hard to track and know. The problem is you have to show that your medicine works. That's science, that's fair. But if the person isn't sick yet, how do you show that you have prevented them from getting sick? So that's something that we are making an investment now in a NASH company. I'm very excited about that space. But we're dealing with that problem as we do this investment and help this company show that their product actually helps people. How do you show that you prevented something that never happened because of what you did? It's just trickier scientifically. So it's a really interesting question.
Can I add something to that?
Yes,
Go ahead.
Yeah, I really think that you're putting your finger on a very important subject here. You have to get a disease before it's recognized as a problem. That's the problem. So how do you do that ahead of time? I think there are some fundamental numbers about your body and its performance. So it's telling you what you're doing. If your hemoglobin A1C is climbing from nothing that your doctor is worried about, and suddenly goes to 7, 8, 9, 10, you're getting diabetes type 2. If you do certain diets that really breaks that back down, that you're being effective with it. I do not know of any pill, and I'm saying this having studied it very carefully, that will fix your diabetes. Anything that is out there. Some things are palliative, but basically through lifestyle change, you're going to get that. So that's very inexpensive, but we don't have that culture. Our doctors are taught disease-based management in medical school. Our system really pays for disease, doesn't pay for healthcare and all that stuff. So we've got a whole culture change to take place. And I'm not really trying to take it all on. If you think, how do you know it? It's very easy to know. There are plenty of books to tell you if you just follow a certain pattern, you can get rid of your diabetes or just manage it much better than making So biopharma has to really rethink what they're doing in that whole area in terms of being effective.
So Fred, I'm just going to summarize because your speaker is a little bit garbled. But
Thank you, Marty.
But what I want to say in summary is that there should be some macro way of measuring the value that prevention is adding, right? And actually, that macro way is you spend less in total, or people get more value for what they're doing. And that was another question I asked, which was, has COVID made people, I think Al, you raised that COVID has made people more aware of healthcare or their health, their personal health. And is that driving demand, right? Because as many people know, I lived with a concierge doctor for many years, and all of the rates for concierge doctors have gone up in Greenwich, Connecticut, where I live, right? So it used to be $5,000, now it's $10,000 a year, it's going to $20,000 next year, probably for most people who have a concierge doctor.
Marty moved to Austin.
Not that much. Al, it's coming to you soon. Don't worry about it. So any thoughts about the demand for healthcare? Because I think people are more knowledgeable, and I think that was raised earlier, which is that there's more data out there, and now they see the data, people are more knowledgeable about their needs, and as a result, they want something, and it's not necessarily within reach, right? So maybe you guys can talk about that.
Yeah,
I mean,
That's something really to talk about over a steak and dinner, because it's too easy to Google something and get all sorts of stuff and confuse the mind. I've just seen it too many times in talking to people. Although there's some good data out there, you just have to be really careful about what you read. Unfortunately, somebody else started to make a comment. I'm sorry.
Yeah, and I was just gonna say, like, not everybody's gonna be able to spend $20,000 a year on their doctor.
Right.
And I actually have a doctor as well, and I love her, she's wonderful. But, there's the advent of all of these, or the expansion of all of these companies like Bio, where you can do it yourself at home, and they do the analysis and send you like everything. I mean, they even tell your chronological age versus your actual age, like that. I mean, that one I was thrilled. That one I was happy without reading, the rest not so much. But there's people who are interested and that might be able to do it at a different price point, and then if they're so interested, then to make those lifestyle changes, because it's exactly what Fred was saying also, it's how to prevent these diseases to start. And none of us want to actually treat the diseases. We'd love to put all of ourselves out of business because we don't have to, or go into the prevention business, or go into the wellness industry. We'd all like to do that. It's not going to be a reality in our lifetime, but these are things that we can start hopefully to be able to shift.
Yeah, well, and I think that, the reality is, you would like to prevent the preventable. There is the non-preventable.
Correct.
And for that, we should be doing our utmost to get the therapies and the treatments that are available to more people who can afford them. So, I think the biopharma industry gets a lot of grief sometimes, and there are some bad eggs in the industry. But for the most part, every researcher, every person who's touching this industry ultimately wants to deliver a better outcome to patients. And that's really what it's about. So if we can measure in outcomes, then we start to change the dialogue.
Yeah, and it also unburdens our healthcare system, and our hospitals are already fully burdened and overburdened. So if they can only treat what is just not preventable, then that's right.
So my other point is that I think we've become really good at treating diseases in the 1970s. I mean, when I was growing up, everybody who died, they died of, heart disease, cancer, et cetera, but everybody's life is extended now by 15 years, probably, right? But Alzheimer's wasn't really a big disease back then, but now it's huge. Or Parkinson's, which we know now Parkinson's is caused by environmental for many people, right? Fred brought up that point. But we're not really good at adjusting to the new diseases as they come, right? So for example, I think mental illness has become a really big problem for a lot of people who are trying to adjust to a society where everybody works online, right? Or the speed that you're expected to work is unfathomable compared to 40 years ago, right? So can you talk about also how the healthcare system isn't really great at being, proactive, et cetera? I mean,
those issues were there, they were not talked about. I think they were being invested in, not at the speed in which they are now being invested in. And there's thankfully now there's a lot more app-based mental health, we gotta wrap this up by 3 o'clock, I have to talk to my therapist online kind of thing. And, I'm not, we're not missing that appointment kind of thing. And I think that is available for everyone, and people are also willing to talk about it a lot more, when that is not something I would ever have said 2 years ago.
even pain management is a big issue.
I would look at it, something like Alzheimer's is a very difficult problem to solve, because you're talking about getting through the blood-brain barrier and delivering a therapeutic that's gonna be, there's unfortunately a graveyard of therapeutics that have not worked or have failed at phase 3 or 2, or it is a difficult problem to solve, and still continues to be based on the recent approval for aducanumab. But that's something that's a little bit it's a harder problem to solve. The technology was not there to even be able to sort of think about how we would go about solving it. And I think a lot of biopharma is learning. They were solving the sort of manifestations of the disease, not the disease, the core disease itself. So look at something like cell therapies, for example, immunotherapies, where it's a curative type of approach, right? You're taking a patient's cells, you're modifying those cells, engineering them. You're maybe in one segment you're treating them so that they will attack the tumor, in another you're sort of rectifying that, but you're then reinfusing that back into the patient to be a really curative therapy. That therapy has a price tag today of $475,000, $450,000. It is curative, but it's not accessible. And so, how do we change that dynamic? I don't think the technology was there in some senses to be able to solve those problems until now.
Any thoughts?
Elizabeth,
So
can I just add something to the very, very good comment, Elizabeth? I think you're very right. People have been trying to fight amyloids in the brain, and that's not the problem. The problem is somewhere else, which is what I think. But we can do some things to change a lot of this. That has to do with doing some early genomics work. If you've got those 4 genes in you, you're going to go that way. So you can do a lot of interesting stuff to prevent it. There's some very good material on it. The same thing with Parkinson's. I won't go into details of it. It's environmental. It's definitely the chemicals we use around our home, the food that we eat, stuff like that. So there's a lot more to this than this panel, but you're right. You're putting your finger in very important stuff. By the way, I didn't mean to dump on biopharma because I believe in them, but I think biopharma that's more interested in putting the emphasis on the wrong syllable is not the way to do it. The emphasis should be on the right syllable, which is that we got to prevent the damn stuff before we get to the study clinic. And there's a lot of money to be made out of that, not just reacting to the medicine. Anyway, very good comment.
All right. I don't have any other questions from the panel or audience.
I think Mary had an answer to that question.
Mary?
Yeah, just real briefly, sort of one of the challenges of doing science, and that's what a lot of what we do is science, is that you have to be able to measure it, right? And so the mental health, these disorders of the brain, it's just much harder, as Danielle was alluding to measure what's going on, how we're influencing it with various, whether they're preventative or reactive treatments. The brain is just harder to reach and measure. Oregon. So we're kind of where we were back in the 70s with cancer, where nothing really worked for cancer. It was really a struggle, but even today in cancer treatments, the endpoints, that's kind of the term for what are you measuring to show that your product works. It's just the size of the tumor, right? There's much more than that. But, whereas in infectious disease, you see with COVID, do you have it? Do you not? You're able to, and testing itself was no small thing. So I think that this space has got so many places that we could do better. I don't disagree with anything that anybody has said, right? Like there's so much opportunity in this space, and it's all driven by showing that your product works through science.
It is. Marissa or Daniella, any closing comments?
Yeah, I agree.
All right. Well, thank you all for a great meeting, great panel. I know we got into some social issues around healthcare also, and there's a lot to talk about. We could probably talk about